All right, Jono, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. I wish I could be there with you, both to see you all and also sell you some books, but I'm happy to do this. What I'd like to do is really have as interactive a session as possible. I have a couple of things I want to read from the book, but basically I'd like to talk about some sort of current event topics related to cabbage palms and share some new information or sort of breaking news kind of stuff, but also hear from you what questions or insights or observations you've had about cabbage palms. So for people that are unfamiliar with the book, I thought I'd just read the last part of the introduction, which will give you a sense of the book. So I'm going to be reading from the bottom of page 6, and here goes. John Muir, the inventor, explorer, and proto-environmentalist, was also a botanist. During his 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf of Mexico after the Civil War, the deeply religious Muir was smitten by cabbage palms, a tree that he said taught him more than any priest. He encountered thousands of plants, wrote glowingly about some, mentioned others, and was silent about most. And while in Florida, he commented, "It was the army of catbriers that I most dreaded." We, like Muir, bestow glowing affection on some plants, ignore most, and lavish enmity and herbicides on those that vex us. It can be argued that every plant gets sorted into one of 3 categories: the useful plants, the useless plants, and the problematic plants. Cabbage palms can be placed in all 3 groups. This book is a plant biography of sorts, not an ecological monograph, but a collection of essays that exploring the personality and contributions of one common tree, various aspects of what is known and unknown about it, and how it interacts with both humans and the rest of the environment. This book may end up shelved with the commodity histories, John McPhee's oranges, Kurlansky's cod, etc., but it deals even-handedly with cabbage palms as non-commodities, what wildlife they support, how long they live, etc. It could be considered a natural history, but it's equal parts cultural history. There's some personal narrative, but it is not a memoir, and there are facts, but it's not academic. It's a peregrinating ramble about a plant you didn't necessarily think you wanted to know more about, but do. It's a demonstration of how the commonplace and ordinary can be seen upon examination to be extraordinary. While you're welcome to sample chapters randomly, they're grouped into 3 topical sections: botany, ecology, and culture, although the boundaries are not rigid. Welcome to the complicated world of the cabbage palm, or palmetto. And of course, cabbage palms are called palmettos in South Carolina, even though most Floridians think of palmettos as saw palmettos. So we're going to share screen. I wanted to, this is sort of a, if I can get there. I need to, let's see. This may not work. What are you seeing now?
I see you. Just you.
Me? Okay, that's not working. Hold on. Let's rewind here. Move this over to desktop 1. That's not helpful. Let's go back. I'm going to try this again.
There it is.
Okay, so there I am with my book, and I read. So this I wanted you to be aware of just because it's up in your neck of the woods. This is some pruning that took place at Fernandina Beach, and I put it on my blog, which is palmettobook.blog. And this is just outrageous. And I'm sure many of you have your own stories. So sort of tongue in cheek, I said they were in contention for a palm pruning award, but that award would be the most abusive palm pruning by a municipality in Florida. This is really, you can see all those green fronds on the ground there. The almost everyone now is coming into line and saying there's no reason to remove green fronds from a cabbage palm unless it's for clearance. So if these palms were actually brushing up against the building or near power wires or blocking a sidewalk or a driveway, yeah, then you can prune the green fronds off. But
Jono,
yes.
Excuse me. What I've got on my screen is a really cute picture of a cabbage with the palm sticking out of it, but I don't have the extreme pruning example.
It's hard
Maybe
to hear you. So what picture do you have, Diane?
It looks like the title screen with the cabbage and the palm.
Oh, it didn't advance. Okay.
Yeah.
That's both helpful and unfortunate. So let's see if there's anything to be done about that. So this is what you're seeing, this Ixia chapter. Let's try let's see if I go. Is that any better?
We can see the palms now, yes.
Okay, so I don't know what I'll have to do to, anyway, this is Fernandina Beach. I haven't spent a lot of time there. I used to get there when we would take a ferry over to Cumberland. But this is really abusive palm pruning. I don't know if I can advance. Let's see here. Yeah. So what do you see an engraving now?
It didn't advance. It's the same
Advance?
screen.
Okay, so I think what I'm going to have to do is, let's see.
You can keep it like this if you want.
Works. Now, do you see an engraving?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Palmetto Avenue on Fort George Island. And I wanted to bring this up just because it's up in your neck of the woods again. This is a really interesting story, and I'm going to read a little about it because it's in the book, and my wife and I are still doing research up there. This is on page 20. And so let's see, I started focusing up the east coast of Florida on Fort George Island, where a tantalizing double row of cabbage palms lines Palmetto Avenue, leading to the Kingsley Plantation. In order to embrace those cabbage palms as the oldest known, we have to accept the account of Henry Neerling, one of many botanical explorers drawn to Florida. 1/4 of his 1933 book, The Plant World in Florida, is consumed with descriptions of palms, and he devotes a portion of his description of cabbage palms to the Palmetto Avenue on Fort George Island. According to Neerling, in 1813, an overseer named Mr. Houston directed Mr. Kingsley's slaves to plant a double row of cabbage palms for 1/3 of a mile along the road approaching the plantation. Then Kingsley returned and discharged Houston, which I guess means fired him, since Kingsley thought that palm planting was useless work. Cabbage palms are notoriously hard to transplant when young, by which people mean small. It's hard to find anyone who recommends moving them with less than 8 to 10 feet of trunk, a condition that can take decades to develop. I believe these palms, evenly spaced 20 feet apart along Palmetto Avenue, are the originals, and therefore actually stretch back into the early 18th century. To walk along this avenue, now surrounded by dense hammock, and imagine the effort involved for slaves to plant hundreds of trees by hand is humbling. And contemplating the fact that the remaining live palms may be the very trees planted by slaves can make one feel quite nearly reverential. Several problems vex that Neerling account, which involves his retelling of a story over a century old. The first is that the 1813 date does not lend itself to corroboration. While there's general agreement that slaves planted the trees, there's controversy over when. Mr. Houston was probably John Houston McIntosh, who owned Fort George Island before Zephaniah Kingsley. According to a Florida Archives blog posting, McIntosh left Fort George Island in 1813, and Kingsley didn't secure a mortgage until 1817, suggesting there may have been some ambiguous period during which the two disagreed about property management. Mary Kingsley Sammis, a daughter of Kingsley, who was born in 1811, remembered helping her mother plant palms. But since the length of the palm planting is now 2/3 of a mile, she could have been working on an extension of the original planting. So while the original plantings could have been as late as the 1830s, it's safe to conclude that some of the remaining palms are more than 200 years old when one accounts for the years needed to grow a cabbage palm to a size that will withstand transplanting. So have any of you been to Kingsley Plantation and noticed them? They're hard to spot now because they're hidden. There's no longer fields on either side. It's all grown up with hammock. So let's see, I don't know, I might not be able to see the comments.
We think we've seen them. Like Fort
Yeah.
George Island is one of my favorite places to visit around
Yeah,
here.
it's incredible.
Yeah, and Betsy Harris
they-
actually like pointed them out, and they're all like really old palm trees.
Right, they're
really
very tall, and you know, many are missing, but if you find two that are close together, you'll see that they're pretty close to 20 feet apart. So it's a pretty interesting site to visit.
Jono, excuse me, Jono, did you actually lead a field trip for?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I was on that trip.
When
Yeah.
the and Florida Native Plant Society met in Jacksonville, I led a field
Mhm.
trip up there to look at them.
Yeah,
you part of that?
I was part of that, yes.
Well, that's
Mhm.
great. So I was up there recently. I don't know if I can find it. Hold on one second. Let me turn off the screen share.
When was that trip?
Can you?
2015 or something.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, sometime around several years ago, but not like, I don't think more than 5 or
Yeah,
7.
let's see. Now I've lost the. I have to get back to finding you all. Here we go. All right, I'm going to step away for a second.
Yeah, I remember him talking about, how there's the problems of age dating a palm, and talking about this book. I guess his nickname or something is Palm Bob or something. I'm not quite sure. So, but I've been waiting for this. Well, I don't know. It's probably been out for a couple of years, and I just never noticed it till this.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a mystery you may be able to help solve. So you can see this is a tablet computer.
Mhm.
I was with my wife. We were up at Kingsley Plantation measuring trees, and I looked at a ditch that ran under the Palmetto Avenue, and this silver tablet was in there. So
Oh,
I didn't know
my.
what it was at first, and I picked it up and looked at it, and it has a barcode. It says property of World Bank.
That's so
Okay,
weird.
and then I open it up, and it's got a little note with the password on a Post-it note. And so I called the World Bank and I said, World Bank, can you get me in touch with security? And they said, they transferred me around for a while. And I said, look, I've found somebody's, tablet computer here. Does anyone want it, or what's going on? And I gave him my phone number and all this information. Never heard from him. So I have no idea. This could be like some great international conspiracy. Why it would end up in a ditch at the Kingsley Plantation, I have no idea. But
It's like a spy drop off or something.
Yeah, it is. It's-
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so let's see. Jessica writes, I live in a forest with many old oaks and cabbage palms, so I would love to know about the dating. Like, how can you tell how old a cabbage palm is?
Mm.
Is that the question?
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, there's only one way to know the age of a cabbage palm, and that is to get a seed and plant it and keep track of it, because so far, there's no known way to take a sample from it and deduce the age. So that's why these palms at Kingsley are so important, because we know whether it's 1813 or 1830, and because of the spacing and because of their height, we know they were planted somewhere in that era and that they're 200 years old. We have some cabbage palms in downtown Sarasota that were planted in 1911, and they're still going strong. So there are probably other sites where people have kept track of a particular tree, but these are very slow growing trees. What my studies have found is that they grow very slowly at first when they're developing a trunk and just coming up out of the ground. Then by the time they have a true trunk that's emerged from the ground, I think they grow pretty rapidly for a while. And if you look at cabbage palms out in a hammock or whatever, you'll see that the leaf scars that are on the trunk near the bottom, they can be like almost an inch apart. And then if you look at one that's say 30 or 40 feet tall and look at the leaf scars, they look more like phonograph grooves. Like the actual incremental yearly increase in height or addition of leaves is really slowed down. So they're just an incredibly slow growing plant. And that's why they're not really grown in nurseries from seed. You can go to a native nursery and they will sell you a 3 or 5 gallon cabbage palm in a pot. But what I advise people is you should not buy a hammock on the same day because it's going to be a really long time before anyone can string a hammock between those palms. So no, there's no easy way. And this leads to another topic I wanted to cover, but is going to be problematic because of this inability to advance images. But let's see. So let me try. Can you all see that?
Yes.
So that's the so-called love tree. Now I know St. Augustine's in a neighboring chapter, but I imagine you all get down to the St. Augustine area. That's in the CO chapter or something. This is a really famous tree. It's at 6 Cordova Street in St. Augustine. And there are a variety of legends that have come up, you know, either based on something or based on nothing. But it's a palm that's growing out of an oak tree. And the most common explanation I hear is that there was a rotten place in the oak where a branch died or something. And this palm seed found its way in there and germinated. And therefore, the oak preceded the palm. But if you have a chance to go and look at this palm at 6 Cordova, you'll see that's the opposite is true. The palm is older than the oak. And in fact, I think if you look closely on this picture, you can almost see the seam. That gray area is where the 2 sides of the oak tree have grown around and touched. And the reason I'm including this, and I think I have to back out again and let's see, come in and show you. Can you? Oh, it's not. So, do you see text?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a list of the different. These are so-called love trees. These are cabbage palms that appear to be growing out of live oaks. And if you're interested, you could take a screenshot of this and go hunt them down. It's kind of fun to walk around in St. Augustine and look for these things. And I wrote an article about strangler figs in 2021 that was in the Florida Native Plant Society Palmetto newsletter. So if you're curious about both strangler figs and these oaks that grow around palms, you can find that article back there. But again, I wish there was a more straightforward way to do this. Can you still see the old text there?
Yes.
Okay,
Facebook bubble.
Let me back out here. Now I've lost my cursor. There it is. Share. So I was on Facebook recently, and this gentleman posted and said that Fairchild enjoyed wrapping oak saplings around young palms, and that there are a number of examples in St. Augustine. So now I have this whole new question of like, did these oaks that are wrapped around these palm trees occur naturally, or did someone like Henry Flagler actually intervene and try to encourage this phenomenon? So if any of you have any insight about that, please feel free to write to me or contact me, because it's it's crazy to think that, I mean, it's could be possible, but it just never occurred to me that this was a result of some human intervention. There are a number of them that are found elsewhere. So they're not unique to St. Augustine, but they are pretty distinctive, and they're unusual because if you think about it, the cabbage palm doesn't have to increase in diameter. Conventional dicot tree has to get bigger each year, but the palm is a sort of a fixed diameter. So once this oak has grown around it, it's not uncomfortable. And that's the same thing with strangler figs. Down here in South Florida, where it's warmer, we have our native strangler fig, Ficus aurea. And there are all sorts of tales about how the strangler fig, kills the palm tree. But you can find far more palm trees that are alive with a strangler fig growing around them than a strangler fig with a hollow section in the center where the palm died and rotted away. So that's part of the explanation for why these trees persist. But this is, excuse me, linked to this question of how do you determine the age of oaks and palms? And it's really common that the palms predate the oaks, and that as I said, the oaks will, if they germinate close enough, or if they germinate in a boot jack, then the oak will end up growing around the palm. So let me go back to the chat and see if there are other questions coming up here. Okay, and again, if people have questions, I'm happy to extemporize on stuff. I wanted to share something with you that I just found myself the other day, and I'm kind of excited about it. And so let's see if I can get back there. Can you see something that says chronologue?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a service, I guess you would call. It's called Chronologue, and you apparently pay $200 a year. So this is more appropriate for a school or a nature center or something like that. You pay $200 a year, and they give you, I guess, a metal plaque that you have fixed to a post, and you stick this post in the ground, and then people that approach the post are encouraged to take their cell phone and set the phone on the post and take a picture and email it to these chronologue people. And then the chronologue people paste these together in kind of a funky time lapse, because everybody's cell phone has a different field of view and they aim them a little differently, et cetera. But let's see if I can show you a little of this. Or maybe it won't play. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Let's see. So you can see these different shots of this. This is a setting in South Carolina that I picked, obviously, because it includes cabbage palms. Unfortunately, they put their posts so close to the coast that by the end of the sequence, it had washed away and they're no longer recording there. But it seems like it's a really neat technique for those of you who are working with native plants. If you have a site where they do prescribed fire, or other areas that change dramatically, it would be really interesting. It's sort of like a citizen science thing that people can participate in and get to see their own picture feathered in with the other people's work. So I'm recommending that to you as something to look into, just because I think it's really neat to allow the public to participate in documenting and how our different landscapes are changing. Now, some of them are really boring, like they just put this post facing the water. And so unless a dolphin swims by or a mullet jumps, it doesn't really, you just get midday and sunset, et cetera. But in a situation like this, a dynamic setting, it's really pretty interesting to see how things change. So I'll stop sharing. And Oh yeah, the palm fiber factory in Jacksonville. That's a great story. So there was a palm fiber was a really big business at one time. So historically, if you think back into the 1800s, there was no synthetic fiber. There were no nylon or Dacron rope. Virtually all textiles, with the exception of wool, were plant-based fibers. And so there was a lot of research about fiber and what could be done with it. And there was big business in harvesting Spanish moss. Spanish moss, they would collect Spanish moss and I think there were different techniques, but one approach was to put it in water and let the green photosynthetic stuff rot away. And then if you've walked around in a hammock that has a lot of Spanish moss, you'll find it looks like a black steel wool, this really black fibrous material. And that's the skeleton of the Spanish moss. And so that had a lot of commercial use. They would use it for seat cushions and stuffing. It was somewhat resilient. And so there was a big facility in Jacksonville that was drying Spanish moss, and they had all these racks outside. And this stuff is really combustible. And that's because if you think about it, maybe you've seen a science demonstration where people burn steel wool. When you have a fiber and it has a really high surface area and there's a lot of ability for oxygen to get to those fibers, that stuff burns really rapidly. So they had these racks all set out with this drying Spanish moss, and somehow I forget the details, but the moss caught fire and it burned like it was just devastated Jacksonville. And so then the company crept out of town and relocated elsewhere. But the other big fiber was not the Spanish moss, but was actually the palms themselves. And so there was a lot of brush making activity. There's a really neat museum if you get to Cedar Key. There's a little Cedar Key historical museum, and they have a well documented displays that describe the process of harvesting cabbage palms and converting them into brushes, primarily little whisk brooms. And I described the whole process in the book, and I won't go into it, but what they would do is they would take boats and they would go up in the Big Bend coast and harvest relatively young, I think like 8 or 10 foot cabbage palms. And then they could only take them out at certain times of the month when the tide was really high. And they would use ox carts to bring all these, when the tides were low, they would use ox carts to bring the palm logs to landings where they could take them back to Cedar Key. And there's a cute story about an ox that wouldn't move. He was just sort of not going anywhere. So the frustrated driver who was trying to get the ox to go to the landing actually lit a fire under the ox. And the ox did not like the fire, so it pulled like 8 feet forward, whereupon the fire was underneath the cart and burned the cart down. So I sort of like that image. But anyway, it's the palm fiber was remarkably good for brushes, but like the Spanish moss, all the soft tissue had to be removed. So they had this very elaborate process of sort of abusing these boot jacks of the palm to separate the softer material from the longer fibers. And then they had long, I guess they're called heddles maybe, where they would sort of comb the fibers through these upright teeth or prongs to organize the strands. And then they were sold all over, but eventually other fibers, synthetic fiber came in. And so now today's street sweepers, have metal bristles or nylon bristles, but historically there was a lot of brush making. And it was such a big problem that there were concerns. A number of prominent botanists were concerned that there was a risk that all of the cabbage palms in Florida could be endangered due to their commercial importance. and probably probably the development of these synthetic fibers helped save the cabbage palms in that respect. I'm going to look at the other. Yes, okay. It seems like some of my cabbage palms have spines, but others do not. Are they different trees? No, they are not different trees. They are the same species, and it's really perplexing to people how they could possibly be the same. So what's going on is the spines or spikes are called bootjacks, and they are the remnant leaf bases of the palm frond. And most leaves on dicots, if you think of a maple or an oak, they shed their leaves each year. And it's a pretty organized process. Before the leaf falls off, there's an abscission layer that forms, and when it snaps off, it's not like the metabolic fluids of the tree are leaking out. It's all very neat and sealed up. For the cabbage palm, the leaves just die on the plant. They don't fall off. There's no abscission layer. They're just stuck there. And so eventually the blade, the big fan part of the leaf, the petiole, the stalk that supports the fan part, will get brittle, and there'll be a windstorm and those will snap off. But then you're left with the base of these leaves, these fronds. And so we know that the tree, the palm itself, is not controlling when these leaves fall off. And the way we know that is that it's pretty easy. If you start looking around, it's pretty easy to find examples where the lowermost fronds are still on the base of the tree, and then there's a midsection where the trunk is bare or slick, and then there'll be fronds up near the top. So if it was based on some chronological sequence, the older fronds would fall off first, and then the middle-aged ones, and then the younger ones as it worked its way up. But the fact that you can find them on the bottom and not in the middle, and then at the top, or you can find the opposite. I've found every different combination. I've found bootjacks on one side of the tree and not on the other side of the tree. So what I think is happening is that it's either physical or biological processes that are resulting in the removal of the bootjacks, so that it gets down to the relatively smooth trunk. So the physical process is most commonly fire, but obviously it could be a chainsaw if you're in an urban setting. But I think the biological processes are more common, and I think they have to do with two life forms. One are insects that are excavating in the bootjacks. So if you're out in the woods and you listen, sometimes you'll hear woodpeckers tapping away at these petioles, at the bootjacks, and they're usually downy woodpeckers. And you can find these bootjacks with lots of holes in them where the woodpeckers have been working on them. So they're not just doing that for amusement. There's some organism that can live in those bootjacks and digest them and form galleries in there. And then it's pretty common to find ants, carpenter ants, in the base of where the leaves attach to the trunk. And the other big factor is fungus. And excuse me, I found if you wait till the summer when there's been a long period of protracted rain, and you walk through a hammock and look at ones that have old bootjacks that haven't fallen off yet, and their areas around the bootjacks are dark. If you look at 20 or 30 of those, you'll find a white fungus that's growing in there. And of course, fungus is renowned for breaking down plant material. So I think what's going on is that the leaves die in place, and then between these insects that are excavating the bootjack, the ants that are building nests in there as well, and this fungus, it eventually weakens the attachment, and these leaves will fall off either in a windstorm or when a raccoon climbs up there or whatever. But that's the explanation as to why some are bare and some aren't. And I agree, they look really different, and it's hard to believe they're both the same plant. Do palms provide nests for bats and other species? Yes. But not all bats. So there's a northern yellow bat. The northern yellow bat does not nest in houses or bat houses. It doesn't go in human structures. It'll be found in Spanish moss hanging down and in the skirts or the dead palm fronds. So some bats will use that habitat and some won't. You see lots of roaches. Yes, there's a lot of stuff living in those bootjacks. So you can find the eggs of anoles, roaches, centipedes. Down here we find scorpions. There's a lot of life in there. You can remove, if they're completely dead, there's, you can remove them if you prefer that aesthetically. Obviously, it is providing habitat for some animals. I've been, one of the things people complain about cabbage palms is they say, I'm going to have to get rid of the palm trees in my yard. And I go, why is that? And they go, well, there's rats. Rats climb up in the palm. They climb up there and they sleep up there. Hold on. I go, really? And they go, yeah, and I don't want rats, so I got to cut the trees down. I said, well, are you feeding rats? And they go, no, we're not feeding rats. And I said, well, hold on a sec. Do you have a bird feeder? Well, yeah, I've got a bird feeder. Well, okay, so this bird feed that spills out of the bird feeder is feeding rats. Do you have a compost pile? No, my neighbor's got a compost pile. Well, the compost pile is feeding rats. Do you have any fruit trees? Oh yeah, there are a lot of, citrus or loquats or whatever in the neighborhood. Well, that's rat food. And so everybody's feeding rats. There are rats everywhere. And the rats are doing about three things. The rats are eating, they're sleeping, and they're making more rats. And so they need a place to stay. And if you cut all your palm trees down, what are their options? That they're going to be looking for your attic or your crawl space or whatever. So my recommendation is, cut down on feeding the cat outside. Try to think about your bird feed use and tighten up on that compost pile. But every neighborhood in Florida has rats. And the choice is, are they going to live in a palm tree or are they going to live in your attic? So make your own choice. So yeah, you can either remove them or not remove them. It's a personal aesthetic. It's just my recommendation is wait till they're completely dead. Sometimes you'll see the majority of the frond is brown, but if you look at where it attaches to the tree, it's still green. Well, if it's still green, it's still photosynthesizing. The tree's still getting something out of it. And even the yellow fronds, before they turn brown, most palms in Florida are deficient in potassium. And as the leaf dies, the palm will withdraw the potassium and recycle it internally. If you cut the palm off, the frond off when it's yellow, before it has a chance to do that, you're just depriving it of an essential nutrient that it can't get otherwise. Let's see. When should the lower frond be pruned off? Yeah, when they're totally brown, if you can snap them off, that's fine. Is any part edible? Yes, the heart of the palm, Brenda's right, the heart of the palm is edible. A lot of palm hearts are edible, but some are toxic. So you need to know what kind of palm heart you're dealing with. It's called swamp cabbage, and people on ranches where there are lots of palms harvest it with some regularity. It's a lot of work. Well, let me say this. If you don't know what you're doing, it is a lot of work. If you're grew up on a ranch in Florida and know your way around an axe and a chainsaw, it's not so bad, but it takes quite a while to harvest one and you don't get a lot of food from it. I have a chapter in the book about swamp cabbage. I prefer it raw. It's just, so what we're talking about here is the swamp cabbage is the undeveloped white base of the leaves before they emerge. So the analogy I usually use is a stalk of celery. When you buy a clump of celery, the outer leaves are bigger and they're tougher and greener. And as you pull them off, you get to increasingly smaller and more tender celery leaves. And that's sort of what's going on with the cabbage palm. So it's not particularly flavorful. It's more of a crunchy, it's sort of like water chestnuts, I guess I would say. And so I prefer them raw in a salad, but the old cracker recipe is to cook it up in a pot with a bunch of other stuff that tastes good. So, but yeah, you can read all about that. They are subject. Walter wants to know about lethal bronzing. Yes, lethal bronzing is a disease that we believe came from Texas. It was called Texas Phoenix palm decline for a while, but it's now more appropriately called lethal bronzing. It's a phytoplasma. Phytoplasma is a organism that's like a bacteria, but it lacks a cell wall. It can't be cultured in the lab. It's transmitted by a tiny little insect called the American palm cicid, Hyplexius crudus. And the Hyplexius insect is native to Florida. I believe the life cycle is that the younger stages of the Hyplexius are found in lower growing vegetation like grass. And as they become adults, then they go and feed up in the growing part of the palm. And this phytoplasma then infects the palm, works its way down to the roots, and then comes back up and kills the tree. So it is a real problem in some areas. It's probably in most all counties in Florida right now. It's invariably fatal. Dr. Brian Bader, who's over in Davie, Florida, working with IFAS, is the lead researcher who's trying to figure out how to deal with this problem. There are a number of other palms that are affected by lethal bronzing. It's called lethal bronzing because the usual progression, first, if there are any flower stalks or fruiting inflorescences, those will die and fall off. Now, if you've pruned all those off, you're not going to see that. But then the next thing you'll notice is that the lower leaves develop a kind of odd bronzy color, usually. So instead of just the sort of straw color you would see in a regular dead palm frond, there's a little more orange in it maybe. And then that color starts working its way up through all the other leaves till it gets to the spear leaf. And then when it gets to that central leaf, it's dead. And as I said, it's invariably fatal. So if you see a palm that's dying, cabbage or otherwise, it's probably best to get it out of there, because before it's dead, it's created conditions for these small insects to travel to other palms. Now, once it's completely dead, it's no threat because insects aren't interested in it. So if you have a dead queen palm or a dead cabbage palm, that could be great habitat for woodpeckers. There's no real disease reason to, at least related to lethal bronzing, there's no reason to remove it. But so yes, it's a problem, and it's believed that there's a bunch of different ways this tiny insect can move around. They can move around in grass, presumably sod that's being relocated. They can be moved in palms that are already infected. They can just move around on car windshields and stuff like that. So it's a challenge to figure out how to get this under control. The possible good news is that in situations where there's not a understory that's grassy, like in a hammock in a river floodplain, it may not be a problem particularly, but in a cow pasture or in a park, places like that, it could be a big issue. So it remains to be seen exactly how problematic it's going to be. Mark writes, in Hawaii, one sees a smooth metal girdle of 24 to 30 inches high, 3 feet off the ground, and that's supposed to keep the rats out. Right, that's to keep rats from climbing up. But they don't think it looks great. Harvesting the heart kills the tree. Yes, absolutely. So you would probably only harvest it if you were in a situation where there are a lot of cabbage palms. If you were in parts of Florida where they're rare, or South Carolina, or Georgia, or North Carolina, other places, probably more questionable. Oh, roasting the heart in foil with butter. That sounds interesting. Restaurant in Cedar Key has a salad that uses heart of palm and peanut butter ice cream. Now, Yes, I have heard that, Walter, but I've also heard that there's a place that has pistachio ice cream. So I don't, I've heard both. And I don't know how that occurred to anyone, unless that's all they had they had some ice cream or peanut butter in the fridge. Yes, Walter says, yes, one has one and one has the other. So yes, you should get to Cedar Key, you should visit the museum, and then you should go have some hearts of palm with either pistachio ice cream or peanut butter and report back on that. I have one in a bad spot. How high does the palm need to be to harvest the heart? I think the people I've gone out with that harvest them tend to harvest them when the hearts are roughly shoulder high. But you could harvest the heart from a smaller one. You're just not going to get very much. There seems to be general agreement that the hearts from big old tall palms are not very good, that you want one that's relatively young. Now, something I didn't explain, and you can read about, or it's better yet to find a Florida cracker who can show you. When you harvest the heart, you end up with this cylinder that's maybe that big around and I don't know, 18 or 24 inches maybe. But before you get to that, you've got to remove a lot of leaves and discard material. So the palm, it's really hard to visualize how these things grow because the new leaves are growing up in the center of the older leaves and they're pushing the older leaves apart, which is why when you find an old palm frond on the ground, a bootjack, it's split, there's a Y. And that's because when it starts out at the top of the tree, it's just a single petiole, a single stalk. But then as that center grows up through it, it pushes it out further and further. And that stretching tears the frond asunder and leads to it being connected in two places. So if you were to do a cross section through the top of a palm tree, you would find two types of tissue. One would be the developing trunk that's, we can sort of imagine sort of pencil shape that's coming up and growing. And then attached to that pencil point are the leaves, the developing leaves. So the developing leaves, as it was with the celery, are the white plant material you want to be eating. The trunk contains a compound, and I don't know what the compound is, but all the people I've talked to that deal with it say it is really bitter, and even a small amount of that central trunk material will make your pot of swamp cabbage bitter. So the guys who do this regularly are very careful to make sure that what they're putting in the pot are parts of the developing leaf and not parts of the developing trunk. Do I think it will ever be endangered? I don't know. Right now, there was an estimate in 2015, I believe, that there are 108 million cabbage palms in Florida. So one thing we don't know about is the genetic diversity of this phytoplasma compared to the genetic diversity of the palms. So if the palms are genetically diverse and the phytoplasma is all basically the same thing, that's good. If the phytoplasma is really variable and mutating like a COVID virus and the palms are all more similar, then that could be a problem. It's funny how it spreads. I mean, it's, I drive through an area in Palmetto, Florida, and the palms keep dying, but they're not dying all at once. It's not like one gets it and then there's this wave that's moving outward and they're all dying. It's like one dies over here and when these little ones are alive and the tall ones are alive. It's not, it doesn't just move through an area and kill every palm immediately. So I don't know. I mean, there are situations, there are oak diseases. Obviously, there's chestnut blight and Dutch elm disease. There are diseases that can get in a species of tree and just completely devastate it. I don't think that's going to happen with the cabbage palms, but it's hard to tell. And hopefully, Dr. Bader will figure out either places to intervene in the life cycle of the the Hyplexius, or find some way to make it less virulent. So the one reason it's called lethal bronzing, aside from the bronze color of the leaves, is that many of you will recall the issue with lethal yellowing. So lethal yellowing was another phytoplasma that affected primarily coconut palms. And it was devastating, but we still have coconut palms. So I'm not too worried that they'll go extinct anytime soon, but it is worrisome, and it is affecting the industry, because when you buy a cabbage palm, you expect it to live, and if it dies within a year or whatever the warranty is, then the provider has to come back and replace it. So from a commercial point of view, it's not good if the suppliers have to keep coming back to replace trees. I read soldiers hugging their boots to dry on the palms that stick out, and hence the term boot jack. I don't doubt that someone hung a boot on a boot jack, but that's not, in my opinion, that is not why they're named boot jacks. And the reason for that is that if you go online and type in boot jack, you'll find a number of devices that are shaped like a palm boot jack. They have a straight piece and then a Y. And they're designed so that you stand on the straight piece with one foot, and you put the heel of your boot in that Y, or the crotch of it, and then you lever your boot off because it's being held there in that Y. And so if you can find wooden ones, you can find cast iron ones. They were a fairly common tool that people would have by their front steps, where in boot wearing context, whether it was rubber boots or leather boots, people up north who didn't have access to cabbage palms would make or purchase these boot jacks in order to remove their boots. So boot jack essentially is undoing what a shoehorn does. The shoehorn makes it easier to put a shoe or a boot on, and the boot jack makes it easier to take off. So yeah, I've even seen photographs of boots stuck on boot jacks in a campfire, in a camp setting, something like that. But I think it's much more persuasive to think that people just use them as real boot jacks. And so it's frequently shortened to boots. People talk about a palm being booted, and that's an abbreviation for boot jacks. Multi-headed palms. Betsy is writing, can you speak briefly about multi-headed palms? Yes, if there are 108 million cabbage palms in Florida, then some significant portion of them are two-headed. We don't really know what creates it. I mean, it's clear that the meristem splits, but it's not clear whether that's insect damage or what. But yeah, there are a number of them around. That because palms are easy to transplant, they end up in botanic gardens. So there's a list in my book of different places where you can go see them. I've found them out in the wild. And there's two-headed palms, three-headed palms, four-headed palms, eight-headed palms. I mean, some of them are just crazy. They must have some bad coding somewhere, and they end up with a lot of multiple heads. Now, there is another palm called the gingerbread palm that normally splits, and it looks like it's right out of Dr. Seuss. They're crazy looking. You could look them up. But the cabbage palm typically just has a single head. And but yeah, if you want to find one, you could either look in that section of my book, or let me just quickly, I'll find, it's called, this section's called anomalies. So let me, so there's one in Kanapaha Botanical Garden in Gaineswood. There's one at Cypress Gardens. There's one at Ravine Gardens in Palatka. There's one at McKee Botanical Gardens. There's quite a few at different places. And of course, individual collectors have them in their collection. You can sometimes even find them for sale, and like in some of the plant finder documents, like the little guidebooks that nurserymen use, Bet Rocks, you'll find people are selling a two-headed palm. So I think I saw a double-headed palm on Fort George Island, but don't ask me where. It was Brenda writes. Yeah, well, keep your eyes open. There's all sorts of crazy palms out there. Someone showed me one here in Mayaca Park, and apparently the palm fell in a storm or flood, and it fell in the crotch of a laurel oak tree. And then the laurel oak tree kept growing and the palm kept growing. So now the palm goes in one side of the tree and comes out the other side and just keeps going. It's crazy. So, and they're variegated palms where they lack photosynthetic material, so they're yellow or golden colored instead of green. There are a number of those down in this area of the state. So yeah, because again, with 108 million of anything, you're going to find a certain amount of variation. And also just, they find themselves in weird circumstances. If you go to Stewart, Florida, there's a park on the water, and there must be 24 palm trees there, and they all blew over in some storm. And then time has passed and they're righting themselves and growing upward again. And so it's really crazy to see all these trees, you know, at this sort of shallow angle, and then they're now turning and growing upward. Is the cabbage palm growth habit different from other palms? Yes. I talked about it briefly in the book. Let's see if I could find that quickly. That palms grow at really different rates. So royal palms, which are really dramatic and people love them down here, they grow really rapidly. They can start forming a trunk in just a couple of years. This is from page 13. In 1970, student researcher Kyle Brown planted some cabbage palm seeds he collected in North Carolina. While his home garden conditions in North Florida are unlikely to replicate what may have happened in the wild, Dr. Brown reports that from the time the palm emerged to form a trunk, which is called the establishment period, took about 20 years. 39 years later, the tree was 39 feet tall, conveniently yielding a rate of 1 foot of growth per year. But the majority of that growth took place in the second half of the year. Like the second 19 years is when it grew most of the 39 feet. Scott Zona and Catherine Maidman, working at Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden near Miami, set out to determine how long various palm species live, not how long they live, but how fast they grow. They found a 20-fold difference in growth rates between the fastest and slowest growing palm species. So yeah, there's a really wide variation. And so I don't know if you have them up there. Down here, we have something called a queen palm. They go really rapidly. They're almost, I would say, invasive. The royal palms grow quickly. I don't know where I'd put the phoenix palms in there. You can find charts of the relative growth rates, but the cabbage palm is one of the slowest growing palms. Is age dating the other species just as problematic? Yeah, and the cabbage palms, as I say, are different because they're so slow to grow. And so landscape architects love these things because they can, if you want shade in a given context, you can plant this cabbage palm, and 20 years later, it's not going to be that much taller. So the shade that's casting is going to be about where it was when you planted it. If you plant a Washingtonia or one of these palms that gets really tall, really fast, then the shade that initially was in the area you wanted it, now it's a half a block away because the tree is so much taller and the shadow of the canopy is way over there somewhere. So for architectural statement or controlling the shade, the cabbage palms work really well. And as I said, we have palms in Sarasota that were planted in 1911 and are still, you know, doing great along the sidewalk there. Palms and fire. Okay, so this gets back to the issue about pruning. So you know, and you saw earlier in the slide that you can prune almost all of the leaves off a cabbage palm and it survives. Now, if you did that to an oak or something, you'd really be putting a hurt on it. So the question is, well, how is that possible that you can remove 90% of the photosynthetic capacity of a plant and it just bounces back? Well, part of the answer, as far as I can tell, is that these palms are very pyrogenic. All of those dead bootjacks on the trunk are just waiting to burn. They're perfectly dry, a lot of access to oxygen around each one. In fact, if you're ever in the Boy Scouts, they taught you to take a little stick and whittle it so there were these little shavings sticking out on either side. I think it was called a feather stick or something. And that was supposed to be the way to start your fire because there was so much more surface area for the oxygen to exit to support fire. So these cabbage palms burn intensely. And if they couldn't survive that in Florida, which has such a high number of lightning strikes each year, then there wouldn't be any cabbage palms. So the palm has a unique ability. The fronds, the green fronds will protect the bud. And while the green fronds may be killed by the heat, they protect the bud. And then when the fires pass, they'll sprout and grow up again. And there's one of those chronologue ones that's in Florida, and they've started it, and it's after a fire, and you can start to see the green leaves coming out. So it's that ability of the palm to recover from a fire that then confers the ability in a landscape setting, in a suburban setting, to cut all those fronds off that would have been killed in the fire, and then the palm will recover. Now, it takes a toll on the plant. It is not great. I mean, if you're a plant, you really don't want to have to go through that. The fact that the palm can survive is testimony to its resilience, but it's like saying a lizard can grow a new tail. Yeah, it can, but it's kind of a drag. It doesn't, not waiting to grow a new tail. So yes, they will survive severe pruning, but that doesn't mean we should be pruning them severely. So Adam, it's 7:10. I know we got a late start. I'm willing to stay and chat as long as people are interested, but I'll depend on you to figure out when you think it's too much. But I'm enjoying these questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions.
Let me bring up one more slide just to, let's see, where are we here? Okay. Can you see that? So if people want to contact me, my email is just cabbagepalm@gmail.com. That's the cover of the book. I'm on Instagram, Jono Cabbage Palm. They're 98% just photographs of different cabbage palms. And I do have the blog I mentioned, palmettobook.blog, and that has sort of current events. I've been writing lately about the war on palm trees. There are a number of cities in South Florida that are dialing back on the use of palm trees. One, because they say they don't produce any shade, and I sort of take them to task for that. And the second is arguments about global warming and carbon. And I have some challenging analysis on that as well. So if you're curious about any of that, you can go to the blog and read about it. I think there's a couple of different articles in there I've written about cabbage palms and in the urban setting. Oh, and let me show you this just because it's fun. Let me back out again. Share screen. So down here, we have these palms that grow horizontally along the rivers. Is that something you're familiar with up in your part of Florida? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really neat. What's going on is if you have a river where the banks are not eroding rapidly, but erode slowly, let me back out of this. If the banks are eroding slowly, the palm ends up falling in slow motion. And the roots, which can extend 40 or 50 feet into the bank, hold the tree and keep it from just flopping in. And so if it's there long enough, it'll start curving upward, just like I was describing in Stuart, Florida. And so it's really neat to go down these rivers and see these more or less horizontal trunks parallel to the surface of the water. And then you can see them curving up. And that means they've been there a number of years, because it takes a while for the tree to respond and start making that turn.
Now, will the roots develop on that trunk?
Say that again, Adam?
Will the roots develop on the trunk? Like if it's
I'm told that if the roots are in contact with soil, that an area called the root initiation zone, the RIZ, will facilitate root growth. But I've never seen the roots grow just because they're parallel to the water. I think they actually have to be in contact with the soil. And if you wander around enough hammocks, you'll see like 3 or 4 feet up on the trunk, roots sticking out, like it got a bad message or something. It's trying to grow roots way above where the soil is. And it's another mystery. Betsy, thank you for your comment. If you haven't had the opportunity to read the book, she recommends it. Yes, and if you like the book, I think I have 27 reviews on Amazon. I kind of stalled out there. So if you, whether you like it or not, you could go to Amazon and record your comments and give it a rating. And I hope to get back up there before too long. Okay, Johansson Park in Atlantic Beach is full of palms with roots at 1 foot or more above the ground. Yeah, it's strange. There's some, you know, I wrote a book with 300 pages and 25 pages of citations, and there's still more that I don't understand about these trees than what I do understand. But thank you all for your patience, both in getting started and staying with it for more than an hour.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you have questions or you see something really neat, a neat cabbage palm, please feel free to write to me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jono. This is an awesome presentation. So I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.